today we've been giving the trainee teachers a taster of doing fieldwork into contrasting woodlands. So we firstly went into a conifer forest. It was a western red cedar plantation planted about 40 years ago. We did several methods to find out basically what's living in that forest. We measured out a 10 by 10 metre square area, and we randomly put down quadrats, and in those quadrats we looked for any signs of animals living in the leaf litter and the soil, counted those and identified them if we could, looked at any plants growing within the quadrat and worked out percentage cover of any plants that we found. We then took a sweep net. We went through any of the plants that were growing in the forest to see if we could sweep any animals off the plants and count those. We then took a white cloth and laid that underneath branches of the trees, tapped the branches or shook the branches, and any animals that fell out of the branches onto the white cloth we could see, and then we could again identify them, count them and make a note of those. Then picked up the quadrats and we held those above our heads and looked up and did an estimate of canopy cover, percentage canopy cover within the quadrat area. And we then also had a light meter, handheld light meter. So we took a reading of the amount of light coming through the canopy. So we had those two sets of data. So when we finished in the conifer woodland, forest, we went up to a oak woodland. This is a woodland that used to be managed by people for coppice, hazel coppice. So the hazel was cut and regrown and used and cut again. And oak trees were grown for timber, and they were pruned so they would grow tall and straight so that the wood could be used for boat building hundreds of years ago. Now it's used mainly for recreation and conservation. So we did exactly the same methods in this woodland. So we ended up with two sets of data can show us the differences between those two forests. So what we found was in the darker monoculture of the western red cedar forestry plantation, there were fewer plants and animals, hardly any at all because of the light. It's a very dark woodland, not much light coming through, not much diversity, no diversity of height of trees or height of plants, so minimal wildlife and plant life there, compared to the oak woodland with hazel coppice, which had more animals, more plant life. The trees were varying heights. There was tree fall, so there was light coming into certain areas. Some areas had been coppiced, so greater diversity of ground flora and fauna. And this was reflected in our canopy percentage measurements with our quadrat and also our light meter. So we actually identified that relationship. We found that relationship between light coming through the forest and biodiversity within the forest. And then we discussed what this means for forestry and land management and all the geographical issues around that. So when people are planting trees and looking after woodlands, we need to think about what are we managing for. Are we managing for timber like the western red cedar, and are we managing for wildlife, or a combination of the two? And if we want more than one aim in our woodland, we have to think about how that works with the management. Are we going to cut some trees, leave some trees? How are we going to get this mosaic, this diversity of habitats that are good for wildlife, people and forestry?